Welcome in. Great to have you with us. It is Big Ten today on a Wednesday. Dave Revson and Anthony Herron back from Iowa City, where offense was at a premium.
That's one way to describe it. It's very difficult to come by yardage and points in Iowa City, but a game that was still really, really entertaining and compelling, even in the result.
Yeah, it was compelling. Obviously, when there aren't many points, everyone's in the game the whole time. So no doubt some suspense. And obviously, happy times for Cyclone fans finally getting a chance to hoist the Cyhawk. It was a wild day there. It was a wild day all over college football as Pat Forty joins us. Have you recovered from the chaos of the weekend, Pat?
Yeah, I've been in fealty to our Sunbelt overlords for the last several days here after they took down Notre Dame, Texas A&M, and Nebraska all in the same day. Incredible for them. It was one of those Saturdays, right, where you look at it on paper like, I'm not sure there's going to be anything that great, and then just everything happens all day from noon till 2 in the morning. That's why this is a great sport.
It is an unbelievable sport, and it was an incredible day. And, yeah, hats off to the Sun Belt, which had a historic day for a group of 5 leagues. So that was the story on Saturday, a crazy day on the field. And then, of course, we had the big story Sunday, which was centered on the Big Ten, the dismissal of Scott Frost at Nebraska after 4+ highly unsuccessful seasons. Mickey Joseph, the wide receivers coach, taking over. We heard from him as the head coach for the first time yesterday. That is today's big story.
So right now, my number one focus and the staff focus is the boys, is the players. That we make sure that they're okay. I appreciate Trev and administration for showing faith in me to lead the program. This is about Nebraska football. It's bigger than me, than anyone else. And I want y'all to understand that. It's bigger than me than anyone else. I want to thank the fans for continuing to support us and to ride with us and to stay with us through thick and thin. They've done that. They didn't wake up Sunday morning knowing this was going to happen, but it did. You had to accept it. And my message to the team was, I know you're hurting. Frost is like a brother to me. He gave me an opportunity to come here and coach at my alma mater, coach at the University of Nebraska. I would always love him and always appreciate him. I would always respect him. The kids would always love him. But I know they were hurting. But at the end of the day, that ball's going to kick off on Saturday. So mentally, we had to get him back and get him ready.
It is going to kick off. It's going to kick off against a really good team in Oklahoma. He talked a lot about the players. I really thought that was a great emphasis on his part, was making it really clear that he was hurting for them. Trev Alberts said some of the same things on Sunday. Anthony, from a player's point of view, what's the challenge right now?
I went through a coaching transition. It wasn't in season, but after my first 2 years with the Hawkeyes, where Hayden Fry was my head coach the first couple of years there in Iowa City, then Kirk Ferentz took the program over. And my situation was a little bit unique because it was during the offseason, and Bob Bowlesby was the athletic director at Iowa at the time. He actually pulled myself and a few other returning starters and team leaders into a room. It was about a handful of us in there directly with the athletic director, and he was getting our opinion on what we felt like would suit Iowa football moving forward as the coach. And not necessarily from a personnel perspective. He didn't ask us for a short list of candidates, but just what temperament, what focus should be there for the next head coach. And so we were very open and honest with him with our thoughts on things, and that ended up just whatever small factor that played in him hiring Kirk Ferentz. So from a player's perspective, you want to feel like you have a level of agency in what happens with the program moving forward, especially those who've been there throughout the entirety of their careers to this point, who feel like they've given a lot to the University of Nebraska. But in the end, it is out of your hands. It will be up to Trev Alberts to figure out what the future of Nebraska football looks like and who that leadership will be.
I think one of the really cool things about this transition is that they were fortunate to have a former player in Mickey Joseph on the staff. It's not as if he is some sort of a hired gun who just came in, a mercenary who was there for a year because that was the best job that was available, right? The place means so much to him. He spent a lot of time in the state, even though he's not from the state, he's from Louisiana, but spent some time there as a high school coach after graduating. So you know it means a lot to him because obviously, Pat, these players have gone through a lot with this school. That does mean a lot to them that they chose to be there, and Mickey Joseph made that same choice many years ago. What do you expect? What's the challenge here against what is a really good Oklahoma team, although one going through a bit of a transition of its own on Saturday?
Yeah, I mean, the challenge is, hey, let's get excited. This is a big game still. And, yeah, you've been through some tumult, and it's been an extremely disappointing season so far. But you bring Oklahoma to town. It's a chance to show our season isn't dead. We've got a chance, an opportunity here to get a bit of a fresh start, change some things that weren't going well that you didn't like with Scott Frost, try some things different, and get out and get after it. Look, we are 3 games into the season, and while I would not have brought Scott Frost back to this season, doing it now gives you a chance to still have some success this year. You can win more games than you lose. You can go to a bowl game. That would be progress. That would be substantial success for Nebraska this year, to simply go to a bowl game, to stop beating yourself, to win some close games, to do the things, to be a little tougher defensively, the kinds of things that they just were not doing under Scott Frost's leadership.
I wonder if in private Mickey Joseph maybe wouldn't have minded 1 week from now, maybe after you're through the Oklahoma game to be able to take this over, Pat. But it does strike me with 9 games remaining, and whether it's 9 now or if it would have been 8 if he takes it over a week later. But there's a big body of work that's available here for Mickey Joseph to put together. Do you think, Pat, that having this much of the season remaining, does that make Mickey Joseph any more of a candidate than he would have been if there were less season remaining?
Sure. I mean, yeah, you've got a long body of work that you can put together. If you can really dramatically turn this around, if you can do something like beat Oklahoma, if you can be competitive in the Big Ten West, then you've got a chance to put some things on your resume that would maybe give you a chance to be the head coach. A lot of time, the interim coaches are not good hires full time, but sometimes you find those guys that can do that. If I'm Nebraska, I would take a absolute tear it down to the studs, rebuilding look at things and try to do things differently, and that probably would preclude an interim coach. But if he shows something really impressive here, you've got an opportunity.
Well, along those lines, Pat, what do you think is the right formula? I'm not necessarily saying who should be the next coach at Nebraska, although you're certainly welcome to give me one if you want to, but kind of more broadly, when you say tear it down, what should they rebuild? Like, what should it look like to win there?
I think you need somebody who's going to be an absolutely really solid line of scrimmage coach. You're not going to bell and whistle people, and I don't think just kind of out-scheme people in the Big Ten. So I look at the guys in the Big 12 from right around that footprint who have had some consistent success now at places where it's hard to win. Start with Matt Campbell at Iowa State. Lance Leipold's a great coach, and Kansas was very fortunate to get him. Look what he's doing there already. Chris Kleeman, unbelievable success at North Dakota State and now doing very well at Kansas State. And then if you want to get a guy who maybe is tired of being at a quote-unquote basketball school and would like to go to a football school, Mark Stoops from Kentucky. So I don't think they will be hurting for quality candidates, but you got to get somebody who is a solid, proven winner, I think, at a Power 5 level, if you can get that right now at Nebraska.
I refuse to accept Nebraska cannot be competitive. I mean, Bo Pelini won 9 games every year he was there, except for the years that he won 10, right? And 2 of those years were in the Big Ten. I mean, it is not as if we're talking about ancient history here, just for whatever reason, the 2 subsequent coaches haven't worked out. But there's still so much going for this program. So again, that's the story with Nebraska, a high-profile opponent this week in Oklahoma. Penn State is a high-profile opponent this week as well as they head to Auburn, a team that is going through a few struggles of their own. I wouldn't say this is an Auburn program that is necessarily humming along, but Anthony, we saw Penn State run the ball really well against Ohio U. Nicholas Singleton, who we see over your shoulder there, was a big part of the reason why. Does it change the way that you look at Penn State that they found a running back who ran the ball as effectively as he did?
It does. It makes such a big difference when you have a running back that can go to the level that Nicholas Singleton can go. And I covered him when he was coming out of high school. He played in the All-American Bowl, was so excited along with so many Penn State fans to see what Nicholas Singleton could look like in a Penn State uniform. And now through just a couple of games, I mean, we saw an inkling of it in the opener against Purdue. You know, it didn't quite get out in space like a lot of folks were hoping to see. And then, of course, we saw it the other day. So when you have that with an experienced quarterback, with multiple outstanding tight ends and playmakers at receiver, then it just takes pressure off the offensive line, frankly, because your blocking doesn't have to be perfect to pick up chunk yardage with an electric talent in the backfield. So that makes a huge difference for Penn State. And then, oh, by the way, they're playing defense at a really high level with Manny Diaz calling the defense there as well. So there's a lot to build off of when you're adding a rushing attack into the totality of that Nittany Lions picture.
And with all the star power they had lost off that defense last year, including obviously Brent Pry, the defensive coordinator, but a lot of really good players, particularly in that front seven, I think there was some question about whether or not they played defense at that level, and at least to this point, they have. So now they go to Auburn. Now, amazingly, Pat, they become the first Big Ten team ever to play a road game at Auburn. I know Auburn isn't necessarily humming on all cylinders here, but give people a sense who don't follow Auburn closely of what Penn State should expect in this opponent.
Well, I mean, first of all, start with the atmosphere. It's going to be phenomenal, just like it was in Happy Valley last year, the whiteout when Auburn went up there. And one of the cool things that you get when the Big Ten and the SEC will ever get around to going to each other's campuses is some bragging rights and some pride from the fan base to say, hey, we do it better here than you do it there. Neither side may be right, but they both believe that. And you are talking about two of the better fan bases in college football in Penn State and in Auburn. And so now it's Auburn's turn. They went up there and they saw that whiteout last year. And you go to Auburn, it is an incredibly loud stadium. The fans are into it. It's packed. And they have one of the loudest video boards I've ever seen. So it is just a seismic bombardment when you are in there. So that's going to be the first thing for Penn State to deal with, and that's going to be one of the great things about this. Auburn is a dysfunctional mess off the field. On the field, they're not very good this year either, but they still have a way. They got talent. They got players. They somehow overcome all of the booster shenanigans that go on around the program, and generally it's a very good program.
That's the good thing to me, Dave, is the fact that Penn State has been on the road already this season, opening up at Purdue. And so to have been in West Lafayette already and have to overcome that and have a late game-winning drive, they'll be prepared. I mean, Jordan-Hare it can be mad. It can be bonkers there when things are going well. It can also be a hostile environment for the home team also. So if Penn State gets something rolling there, then maybe Brian Harson's squad, maybe they'll be back on their heels a bit if the home crowd isn't necessarily with them.
I've been there for a game. It was about 15 years ago, maybe more, I guess now, probably 17, 18 years ago. And it is a wild scene, no question about it. But kind of to your point, I mean, Penn State's done pretty well in games like this. 16 of their last 19 on the road against unranked teams they have won. And as you say, Pat, there definitely is it doesn't feel like the Brian Harsin hire has gone smoothly. The AD just stepped away here within the last couple of weeks. It is a mess. I guess the flip side of that is a win against a team the caliber of Penn State would go a long way.
Absolutely. That would quiet things down. They've started 2-0. It's an unimpressive 2-0.
Yes.
They labored to get past San Jose State. Their offensive line is not good. Their quarterback play is not good. They've got some good running backs. They've got some good guys on defense, but they start with 5 in a row at home here. So you get this one and you start building some momentum, and maybe Brian Harsin can salvage his tenure there. But right now, there's just so much outside noise going on that it's a bit of a difficult situation for him.
And one thing that I think is advantage Penn State as well is the fact that in the opening game, Drew Aller got in when they didn't necessarily want him to. Game number 2, Drew Aller got into the lineup in a comfortable situation. He's performed well both times out. If you can maybe just have even an Aller package, I don't think it turns into a controversy for Penn State at quarterback, but they've taken step back in recent years when Sean Clifford hasn't been healthy. So now to get Drew Aller, who had experience in a hostile environment week 1, you have a potential rotation that we've already seen them utilize when Will Levis was there at quarterback. It gives great potential for depth at a lot of positions.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we talked a lot about what happened to Penn State's season last year after its great start, and they're in the top 5 in the country. I mean, the line of demarcation was Sean Clifford got hurt, and from there they just weren't the same team, even when he tried to.
He was the best player on the field against Auburn last year.
Yep.
Then he got hurt against Iowa, and the season shifted.
Yep. All right, should be an interesting one again on Saturday at Jordan-Hare Stadium. Saturday, a football tripleheader kicks off with Indiana against Western Kentucky, or some will see Northwestern host Southern Illinois. Then Wisconsin clashes with New Mexico State, and Iowa battles Nevada in primetime. It all starts with Big Ten tailgate Saturday on the Big Ten Network and, as always, on the Fox Sports app. Anthony, speaking of the Hawkeyes, we mentioned it earlier. You were on the call against Iowa State last weekend, 150 yards of total offense for the Hawks.
Was it that much?
It was.
I thought maybe it was even less. Okay.
It was, yes. They were able to surge to 150 yards at the end. Kirk Ferentz had his news conference and said Spencer Petras is still going to be his starting quarterback going forward here in that game against the Wolfpack on Saturday. What can they do to get this offense going?
What I told folks immediately after the game, like just even leaving the broadcast booth at Kinnick Stadium, a whole lot of folks were like, all right, what's he going to do at quarterback? When's he going to put Alex Padilla in? I told folks when I was leaving the stadium, Kirk ain't changing quarterbacks. Nobody believed me. But he's not a man to make rash decisions. And there is a resume for Spencer Petras that predates what we're seeing right now. I mean, he was the starter in 2020 when, yes, they lost the first couple of games. They not only won the last 6 games, but they were dominant in all phases, defense, special teams, and offense. Those final 6 games of 2020 started pretty strongly last year as well, and now things have tapered off. How do you address that? That's what they're working to figure out in the walls there in Iowa City. But they do see Alex Padilla on a daily basis. We got to see Alex Padilla for several games last season. It's not exactly the Michigan quarterback situation. You don't have a guy who led the team to a Big Ten championship who's going to be waiting in the wings here. So, I mean, at some point, it won't shock me. Matter of fact, I anticipate we'll see Alex Padilla at some point this season because of some of the inconsistencies that have been there for Spencer Petras. It doesn't shock me that going into the 3rd game of the season, Kirk Ferentz isn't pulling him right now, considering all the other factors that we've been discussing, the inexperience of the offensive line, the injuries in the backfield, the injuries at wide receiver. Putting Alex Padilla into that situation, I wouldn't necessarily expect the Iowa offense to just take off because it's a difficult spot that the quarterback is in right now.
Right. The group around him is not particularly good. I mean, this is not solely a quarterback issue. This is a offense issue. And as you said, really, you could go to every point on that offense, maybe outside of tight end, and you could say they've got to be better here. And they're just not. That being said, I mean, Pat, I kind of look at this in 2 different ways. I mean, one of them is you're playing Nevada this week. Nevada has one of the top 10 worst pass defenses in America in terms of yards per game allowed. Again, it's a small statistical sample, and they played Incarnate Word, which throws the ball all over the place. On one hand, you could say, well, maybe this is the time to make a change. Or the flip side could be, hey, this is a game where Spencer ought to be able to build some confidence. And maybe you keep him in this game because you know you are playing a team in Nevada which doesn't have a great defense, and maybe this can become a bit of a springboard for him mentally.
Yeah, I mean, you could look at it both ways. I look at it this way, and Kirk Ferentz has done incredibly well in his career by not listening to the media, so, I take this for what it's worth here. But it can't get any worse than what they have done. They're last in the nation in total offense. They're last in the nation in scoring offense. They're last in the nation in yards per play. Change quarterbacks, it can't get worse. It cannot get worse. So give Alex Padilla a chance to see what he can do. Give the fans some excitement. Maybe the rest of the offense gets a little perked up as well. Spencer Petras is a good guy. I talked to him last year. He's an impressive young man. Nothing personal against him. But since that Penn State game last year, the returns are not good. I mean, we have seen a large body of work since then with not much to show for it. Alex Padilla, I would give him an opportunity here, and let's see what can happen because, once again, it can't get worse than it's been the first 2 games.
I believe the opportunity will likely come at some point this season for Alex Padilla if Spencer Petras doesn't, not only marginally, but perhaps doesn't greatly improve in his productivity. I was able to detail throughout the game Saturday some of the inconsistencies there, the inaccuracies on what should be layup passes. That being said, Alex Padilla, I think from his perspective, and perhaps he's already in this mental space, but he certainly needs to view whatever he's doing day in, day out on the practice field, in the meeting room, as an opportunity to continue to infuse whatever confidence needs to be there for the coaches to say, perhaps he does give us an offensive boost. Because in the end, they know this is a window. They've got maybe the best defensive coordinator in the country and one of the great defenses that they've had. They've got probably the best special teams coordinator in the country in LeVar Woods, leading one of the great special teams units. The other two phases for Iowa football are championship caliber. How do they have the offense ascend to somewhere near par with those other two units? I believe Kirk Ferentz and his staff see that. They want that. If Alex Padilla isn't in the lineup yet, it's because they haven't seen him surge to an extent where they think he's the guy who gives them the best opportunity to win. Kirk Ferentz is not a guy who will make a change just for change's sake. He wants to make a change that he feels like will enhance his team's opportunity to win.
Right, and I hear what both of you are saying. I mean, Pat's point is a great one because
maybe it's
obviously,
just a spark. And who
obviously
knows?
it
Throw Padilla
truly
in,
could
maybe
get
it
worse,
sparks
right?
something.
I mean, 14 points in 2 games is the fewest since 1982. It's essentially the worst any Big Ten team has done this century through 2 games. I mean, it does feel like on the surface, why not just, I mean, it's not a.
Because there's 10 games left, Dave.
No,
if there were 4 games left, sure. There's a lot of football this season. I think we'll see Alex Padilla at some point. It's very early.
All right. The situation in Ann Arbor is significantly different in that they did make a change.
They do have 2 quarterbacks.
They went away from a.
It's not exactly the same, though.
They went away from a quarterback who won a Big Ten championship last year and took them to the college football playoff because I think it was clear J.J. McCarthy was far better. Based on what we have seen to this point, does the ceiling in your mind change here for Michigan? Like, can they be better with J.J. McCarthy at quarterback than they could have been with Cade McNamara?
The ceiling is definitively higher with J.J. McCarthy because of the physical potential that's there, just the raw horsepower that he plays quarterback with, both as an athlete with his mobility, the sheer arm talent, not just arm strength, because people overuse the term arm talent. Not having just a strong arm, but an ability to thread passes in, an ability to adjust the trajectory of the football, fit it over the top of a second-level defender and get it in like a hole shot before that third-level defender gets there. He's a very gifted passer as well. Where he's untested and where he was definitely untested against Hawaii, how does he operate under duress? The snap-by-snap duress of a pass rush, the duress that can be there when the game is on the line. Jim Harbaugh highlighted that so much last season when J.J. McCarthy stepped into the door as just a better talent at the position than Cade McNamara. But the leadership, the grit, the consistency that Cade McNamara brought to the table is a huge part of what led them to a Big Ten championship last year. That's where J.J. McCarthy, as much as he's ingratiated himself to his team, he's got to prove he can be that guy.
Right. I think that's where it's been really curious. I mean, and again, the situation settled, right? I mean, clearly J.J. is a better guy on the field. Cade McNamara was nowhere near the player on the field in these first 2 games that he was last year. I mean, it just seemed to deflate him, everything he was going through. And to a certain extent, you understand it because he felt like, hey, look at my body of work from a year ago. But I think it's indisputable J.J. McCarthy was the better player in these first 2 games. So, Pat, I'll ask you the same question. Do you see Michigan differently? Do you see them as maybe not just a team that has the potential to make the playoff, but now are they a team that can win in the playoff with a quarterback like J.J. McCarthy?
Yeah, just more explosive. Yes, more juice, more verve, more for defensive coordinators to worry about there, both from the running aspect, from J.J. McCarthy's athleticism, but bigger plays through the passing game probably too. So, yeah, I think this enhances Michigan, and I already thought they were going to be very good offensively. I think that the reason this took this long to hash out is a credit to Cade McNamara and who he is and what he's done there. He's just one of those guys that's hard to put on the bench. And it took J.J. McCarthy getting on the field and demonstrating, look, I'm just better, okay? But you have a fallback that's a really good fallback. If J.J. McCarthy gets hurt, and that happens often in college football, and especially if you're a runner, it can happen, you can turn to the bench and say, hey, we're still a good team. Go get him, Cade. And, assuming Cade McNamara doesn't just go into a shell here and lose his focus. I don't think he will. He's just that kind of guy. He's a winner. He's a quote-unquote professional, handles his business well. So I think that Michigan is going to be even better than they could have been, but they got a darn good plan B if it comes to that.
That's a big thing. Have to keep Cade McNamara engaged, right? And I think that's the challenge for Jim Harbaugh. And again, Jim Harbaugh knows quarterbacking. He was a really good quarterback himself. So we'll see how they're able to handle it. But again, the decision's made. J.J. McCarthy, the starting quarterback against UConn, and presumably going forward. It is time for our big stat on Big Ten today. Michigan State's Jacoby Windman leading the nation in sacks, 2 games in with 5.5. That is the most for any Big Ten player in the first couple games of a season in the last 17 years. He also tops the country in forced fumbles and tackles for loss. He is a transfer from UNLV. For those who are not aware, we're actually going to have him live on Big Ten Today tomorrow, so we'll learn a little bit about him as a person. But what has made him so effective as a player?
He is a ferocious pass rusher, and that isn't necessarily what's shown on film. In his time at UNLV, he wasn't a guy who was just consistently an edge rusher for them within their defensive scheme, but that's what they've been doing with him at Michigan State. And I think it's one of the more remarkable things that Mel Tucker and Scott Hazelton have been able to do is to figure out how do we sort of shift pieces around to suit the skill set of individual talents that may fit well within the scheme as we want it to operate. And Jacoby Windman, to be able to rush the edge over and over again in the way that he does, both one-on-one and situationally, they'll use him on twists and games and sort of move him around. And as more opponents get film on Michigan State and try to get a bead on where Windman will line up, it'll be important for them and for him to figure out, okay, how can I not only rush one edge the entire time? How can I move around to the opposing edge, perhaps back in the box in a 2-point stance, which he's done at times at his previous stop at UNLV as well. To use his versatility in and around the entire Spartan Dog defensive scheme, I think would be something that will probably be fun for Tucker and Hazelton to kind of figure out, because he seems to be a very versatile playmaker and one who will make a secondary that was beleaguered last year play at a much higher level, because the quarterback's got to get rid of the ball.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to me, that's the big change. And remember, they hired a pass rush specialist in Brandon Jordan, who, in a crazy coincidence, was Jacoby Windman. He was the volunteer defensive line coach at Jacoby Windman's high school in New Orleans. So they have a history with one another, and now they're reunited in East Lansing. And Jacoby Windman came to Michigan State to play linebacker, as you said. The notion was not that he would be an edge rusher, but he has turned into one of the best ones, at least to this point statistically, the best one in the country. So, Pat, when you look at this Michigan State team, I mean, we talked so much last year about, hey, the issue with this team is the defense, and particularly the pass defense. Now, they were a team that turned in a lot of sacks and tackles for loss a year ago, too. So this isn't a huge change, but he is a game changer. Does this change the way you look at Michigan State, particularly from a defensive point of view?
Absolutely can, yeah. I mean, we've got to see now as the competition upgrades, but yeah, he's a game wrecker. 4 forced fumbles. Nobody else in the country has more than 2. And I mean, what Mel Tucker's been able to do in the transfer portal, incredible. Kenneth Walker III, nobody was talking about him as this transformational transfer last year. Then he was. Jacoby Windman, nobody was talking about him coming from UNLV. But as I said last week on the show, guys, the weight room was big for Michigan State in the offseason. Jacoby Windman was listed 230 last year at UNLV. He's now listed 250. So he has gotten some power packed onto his body, and he's making it work. And you want a matchup to watch. Okay, he's 6'2", 250. Washington's offensive linemen, 4 of them are 6'6" or taller. Can he get underneath them with the pass rush, or are they going to be able to frustrate him with maybe arm length there? That's just going to be a really interesting matchup, is just his size versus the incredible length and size for Washington's offensive line.
How good is Washington? Give us a sense. I mean, we see them 2-0. Michael Penix, the Indiana transfer, putting up huge numbers. They're averaging better than 570 yards per game. The opposition hasn't been great, but do you feel like Washington has turned a corner here?
I do. I think the coaching change has been great for them. Kalen DeBoer, who did very well at Fresno State, comes in. They didn't lack for talent last year at Washington. They lacked for cohesion and leadership, and I think that was a coaching change they had to make. And so it's not one of these where you're starting from scratch and rebuilding. You got some pretty good players to work with, and we've seen that. And then DeBoer reunites with Michael Penix, brings him in, and he looks like Michael Penix of 2020, as we saw at Indiana. So you combine a good offensive mind, a good quarterback, and some other good players there. I think Washington has a chance to be a lot better than they have been the last couple of years.
And they've thrown and caught the ball at a really high level at Washington for a number of seasons now. And it began, like you referenced in there, Pat, really years back. The talent had been there. They had begun recruiting at a pretty high level in the Pac-12. So I think at this point, knowing that just the personnel will be on par for Indiana, but also having a head coach and a starting quarterback who've been around the block versus Big Ten competition before, they'll be prepared for what Michigan State throws at them. So if this is a game that the Spartans can go out and perhaps even control, I'm going to be really impressed with that, because personnel-wise and just the direction of the program with Kalen DeBoer leading the way, Washington's going to become a threat again in the Pac-12.
2-0. The wins are Kent State and Portland State. I mean, again, this is not murderer's row here, but they have put up some huge numbers. And again, there's the issue of heading west, which is always challenging for Big Ten teams. So they get a Pac-12 team in Washington. Minnesota gets a Pac-12 team too, albeit a far worse one in Colorado. I said this yesterday, and I mean, statistically, Colorado may be the worst team in the Power Five. They're certainly on a very short list. They're in that conversation. Minnesota has been overwhelming so far against opposition that frankly has been underwhelming. But what do you make of the Gophers? How good a team do you think this is?
They seem to be focused. They seem to be attaining a level of consistency that lacked last year. And so that's why they weren't a double-digit win team last season. And so far, we've seen a Gophers outfit that's been able to show up and be dominant in every phase up to this point. And that matters for a game like this, because last season, we did see some trap games, the Bowling Green game, after coming off of just blowing the doors on the road off of this same Colorado Buffaloes outfit, coming off of a season where their head coach had been the Pac-12 Coach of the Year and they were the division title in the conference. Minnesota went out there and let everybody know, Colorado's not as good this year as they seem to be in 2020. And then they lost to Bowling Green. Last season, same thing happened after they blew out Northwestern, lost to Illinois. So the consistency needs to be attained. And Colorado was one of the linchpins last year. And I would imagine P.J. Fleck probably pointing that out to his team, that this was one of those games that ended up, sort of being the fulcrum of some inconsistencies we saw early from the Gophers.
Yeah, no doubt. Look, so far they have looked to be the class of the West. But again, I think it's a function to a certain extent, or at least it could be argued that it's a function of who they played. I don't think anyone in the Big Ten would not be 2-0 with Minnesota's schedule right now, but the way they've gotten to 2-0 has been really impressive, Pat. I mean, they have absolutely blown the doors off of people. What do you think about Minnesota and whether or not this is a team that can achieve that consistency that Anthony's talking about?
Yeah, I think you hit upon the key there is just that they look like you want a Minnesota to look if they're going to succeed. They have been dominant against not very good teams. They have been really good at the line of scrimmage. They're running the ball well. It's so great to see Mo Ibrahim back and doing what he's done. And, I mean, his first two games, carbon copies of one another. And if you can consistently get that from him after the injury-riddled backfield they had last year, that's a big start. And that helps Tanner Morgan, too, who, the more play action and the more they're honoring the run, the better Tanner Morgan can play, I think. Overall, this looks like a Minnesota team that's kind of feeling it and got a little bit of that eye of the tiger, like we're good enough this year and we're looking around the competition, we could win this division.
At Michigan State next week, I think we'll learn an awful lot about them in that game. Remember, they have to go to Michigan State and Penn State in crossover games this year. So, yes, they don't play Michigan and Ohio State, but certainly not a cakewalk for them. So, next couple weeks are critical for the Gophers, and one would assume should have their way with Colorado. But again, to your point, we would assume that about Bowling Green last year, too.
Man, no doubt.
Coming up on Friday, defending national champion, fourth-ranked Wisconsin, battling number 16 Florida in front of what will be a raucous crowd at the Kohl Center, looking to set an NCAA volleyball attendance record. It's women's volleyball powered by Unleaded 88, coming your way Friday, 8:30 Eastern, here on the Big Ten Network and the Fox Sports app. It is time for Big Ant's Impact 5. We are rating teams today, counting down from 5 to 1 in the league. So where are you starting?
Well, this one was a little bit tough for me because I was trying to determine just a couple of games into the season and varying levels of competition, how do you sort of weight each one of those? And at number 5, I've got Penn State there, and I wasn't completely sure because of the dominance that the Nittany Lions showed in their most recent game, maybe I should boost them up even higher. But it was very impressive for them to go on the road and take down Purdue. Also very impressive for them to be just overall dominant in their second game out. So I love the growth we're seeing from Penn State, but I'm still in a little bit of wait-and-see mode on the rushing attack. That's probably my main hesitation at the moment. It's nice to see Nicholas Singleton in the open field. Can they continue to do that? Are they willing to continue to do that? I believe they want to, but it's been a couple of seasons now. We haven't seen that from the Nittany Lions running the football. So right now I'm a little bit of wait-and-see mode on the run game.
Well, that's fair. As we talked about, got off the 5-0 start last year and then saw things go downhill, partly because of the Sean Clifford injury, but certainly optimistic, I think, early on, and Singleton feels like he gives them a different dimension. Where would you go with number 4?
At number 4 is a squad that is showing growth potential in the right phases. We were just talking about the Michigan State Spartans, and we knew they were going to come in and want to run the football. I felt like going in that we would see a squad as well that would have the ability to be able to throw the football at a high level. Haven't necessarily seen the Spartans able to do that either. But so actually here on the screen we got Minnesota. I got Michigan State at number 4, but I can talk Minnesota for the moment as well because I do believe the Gophers, we were just talking about Minnesota's versatility, top to bottom, and how they operate there. I've got Michigan State at number 4, still Minnesota a shade ahead of them at number 3 in my Impact 5 because overall I think there's more proven commodities on the field for Minnesota, and that's actually played out throughout this season here. So Michigan State I do see as the number 4 team in my Impact 5 because I'm waiting to see whether or not that pass defense, that pass rush, and frankly, the performance of Peyton Thorne does concern me a little bit here early in the season where he had been so efficient throughout much of last year, and that hasn't been the case for him here early.
So you just feel like fewer question marks with Minnesota than with Michigan State? Is that kind of what you're getting at there?
I do. I mean, in Tanner Morgan, there was a little bit of explosion, some combustibility to the passing attack for Minnesota, which was nice to see, and that was something that seemed to lack the last couple of years since that breakout 2019. They may be getting back to that direction, and overall, it feels like the proven commodities coming in are all performing well for the Gophers.
Right. To me, they made an effort. I mean, they made a decision going into that Western Illinois game that we are not just going to run the ball 50 times, that they are going to throw it and that they were going to kind of prove to themselves that they could do it because they didn't do it quite as much, I didn't think, as I expected in the New Mexico State game. So, again, how does it carry forward? You're going to play far better teams than Western Illinois. So then we're down to 2 at the top.
Yeah, it's a close one, man. It was a close one for me. It was. I'm sticking for now with Michigan at number 2. And it's by a skosh. It's by an eyelash for the moment because the Wolverines, for what they've shown, we've been talking about this early season Michigan schedule since before the season began. So for the moment, I've still got the Wolverines at number 2, but they're climbing and they're raising their level of play. They're raising the perception in my eyes, not just a team that can compete in the East or, maybe be a foil to Ohio State, but maybe a national championship caliber team. There was so much newness on the Michigan defense, coordinators on both sides of the ball. What approach are they willing to take on offense? And what encourages me about Michigan as much as anything, with J.J. McCarthy at quarterback, they are now opening up the passing attack. I've been talking to you since that college football playoff matchup last year about Michigan's play calling on offense and what are they willing to do with it? Are they willing to utilize those playmakers on the outside? And now with this young quarterback in the lineup, we saw it against Hawaii. Whether or not Michigan would now say, let's feed it to Donovan Edwards in the open field. Let's get Eric All involved as a tight end. All these playmakers like Ronnie Bell that we have at wide receiver, they are willing to showcase that talent with J.J. McCarthy, and in a way that, frankly, we just didn't see them willing to showcase it with Cade McNamara in the lineup at quarterback. So in my opinion, it's not just the personnel end of it, it's the confidence that this offensive coaching staff for the Wolverines has in the personnel now behind center, where they say, you know what, let's put some points on the board, man. Let's open this thing up, and it's a more fun Michigan offense.
And yet you still have them at number 1 after I hyped the whole thing up and said, did he change it at the top this week? I mean, we got a little bit of the transitive property with Ohio State, right?
Yeah.
We saw Notre Dame lose to Marshall. It's
right.
like, okay, maybe that win didn't mean as much as it felt like it meant in week 1. We've seen Michigan look dominant. Ohio State was fine in week 2 against Arkansas State.
Yes,
but
they were fine.
Why are they still number 1 when Michigan was the team that won it last year, and Michigan's probably looked better on the field to this point?
I must admit part of this is preseason expectations coming in here, so I will admit that factors in for me. And personnel-wise, just recognizing what's there and what's on the come here. Jackson Smith and Jigba expected to be back in the lineup here, according to Ryan Day. Julian Fleming will be back sometime soon as well. So one of the deepest receiver corps in the country. We'll get 2 of the most talented receivers back into the lineup for Ohio State as well. And their defense has been quality and I believe growing. There's a lot of growth that's showing potential there for Ohio State as well. And the rushing attack, when they've wanted to do it, they have shown the ability to do that. And I believe what will continue to be a growing willingness. You referenced Minnesota almost sort of forcing their passing attack to grow. We saw Mike Loxley do that with Maryland in week 2. I believe we saw Ohio State do that in week 2 as well. Just say, you know what, we can get untracked a little bit better offensively. We got a quarterback, we got playmakers. Let's feature that a little bit and make sure that the rhythm, the explosion of the passing attack is able to be showcased.
Big plays were back. They had 8 of 30 yards or longer after they had just 1 against Notre Dame. Pat, do you agree here? Do you still put Ohio State ahead of Michigan?
You know, it's funny, guys. I've been sitting here listening to this and formulating a response, and we talked about it earlier before the show. You blow the whole thing up, and I would say, based on results to date, Penn State winning at Purdue is the best win in the Big Ten so far. If you want to just look at what's happened on the field, Penn State over Purdue, why not put Penn State number 1 this week? Then, okay, you can still give Ohio State credit for beating Notre Dame, but less credit than they had before. Put them number 2. And then you got 3 teams that look good but haven't played anybody. Michigan looks great, but boy, that schedule's awful so far, and it's not going to get any better this week. I'd put Michigan State in there. I'd put Minnesota 5th. I just think the 4 teams in the Big Ten East are better than anyone in the West. But if you want to just go on what's happened through 2 weeks, I'd give a slight nod to Penn State, crazy as it may sound.
You're not crazy. You're really not. I just don't completely believe it yet. If they're going to run the football like that, Penn State will be vaulting up this list. They will be racing towards the top of my Impact 5. I got to see it to believe it. So far, out of the last maybe 2 years, I've seen it 1 game, Pat. And I just want to see the Nicholas Singleton thing. If there's going to be an era of Penn State football, if we're getting back to Saquon Barkley mode, then all right, I'm good with that, man. They got the defense that can go. They got a Sean Clifford when he's healthy that I believe plays at a high level. We see the playmakers out there, Tinsley and Washington, the tight ends. Just let me see that run game. If this is legit, if this is real, then I'm on board.
Because they did not run it great against Purdue.
No.
Under 100 yards in that game. With a chance to make some history Saturday when the Scarlet Knights faced Temple. A victory would be his 79th as the school's head coach, moving him past Frank Burns and into first place on the all-time wins list at Rutgers. 68 of those wins came in his first stint in Piscataway. Pat, can you put into words what Greg Schiano has meant to this Rutgers program?
I'm telling you, it's the perfect fit. And it's great that they got this second go-round here. He built it up to begin with, was the best coach they had had. His first stint there, went to the NFL. That wasn't a great fit. He comes back and gets his second chance. And look, they're not going to win a national championship, but they're back to being competitive. They're back to being respectable. They're going to be a tough out probably more weeks than not in the Big Ten. So this has just been a really good marriage, and to have it work out again for the second time, and the start to this season, the possibility of starting 3-0 is great. You go on the road and find a way to beat Boston College. You've got quarterback injuries, you overcome that. So my hat's off to Greg Schiano and to Rutgers for realizing they both need each other and making things work out so well together.
And Greg Schiano actually gave me a little bit of context when I was talking to him in Indianapolis at Big Ten Media Days, Pat, where he even pointed out for the first time he was at Rutgers and all the success they had, they weren't a Power 5, program at that point. Now competing in the Big Ten, just from a resource perspective, there was a reason that he valued resources before he even ended up accepting this job, just to make sure that Rutgers administration recognized what was necessary for the Scarlet Knights to take a step forward beyond just the coaching abilities of Greg Schiano. And they're doing that, but they're still in their infancy of competing at this level, not only in football, but in all sports, and he continues to progress this program forward. It's really impressive to watch what he's building.
No, it is, and you mentioned, it's all sports, right? They had a great field hockey season last year. They made the NCAA tournament a couple of years in a row in basketball. It just feels like Greg Schiano, in concert with Pat Hobbs, the athletic director, they understand the value of this branding-wise for the university, Pat, and it's made a huge difference.
Absolutely. No, and to Anthony's point, yes, I think Schiano wasn't coming back unless there was going to be a full buy-in from a facility standpoint, and I do think that carries over to their other sports. They've got a lot to sell, really, at Rutgers in that area in terms of being able to recruit to a lot of different sports there and to be competitive across the board. So this has been a very good marriage. Again, Schiano and that administration, Pat Hobbs, directing them the right way. There was quite a bit of dysfunction at the leadership level for a long time, and now they've solidified things and just kind of figured out, okay, this is who Rutgers is and who Rutgers can be going forward.
Yeah, they have Temple again coming up this week, a team that has lost 9 straight against FBS teams. And you really begin to understand the identity that Greg Schiano wants this team to have, guys. You look at the rushing yards so far this year. They have 530. Their opponents have 48. Yeah, I think he wants to be physical at the line of scrimmage.
Even without their presumed starter at quarterback, even in the lineup yet.
Yeah, no, incredible stuff. Pat Forty, great stuff. Thank you so much. Anthony, always a pleasure. We will see you tomorrow here on Big Ten Today. Again, Jacoby Widman of Michigan State joining the show.